For my 5th field report, I decided to talk about the Magnus Archives, which is a horror fiction podcast written by Jonathan Sims and directed by Alexander J. Newall. Jonathan Sims voices the main character, who is also named Jonathan Sims after himself, and the character is this college student, who's a head archivist of something called the Magnus Institute, which is a archival collection investigating the paranormal. The last time we spoke, I talked about how I was going to do a report on Lolita, and I actually was planning on doing that, but I have about 30 pages left, I believe, and the deadline is quickly approaching, so I thought that I would save Lolita for the next batch, as to make for a better and more completed analysis. I have listened to the first 5 episodes of the Magnus Archives, and I am very roped in. I can't even lie to you. Each episode is about 25 to 30 minutes long. They really vary, but I think the longest one I've listened to is 30 minutes, and the shortest I've listened to is 14 minutes. So it jumps in between, but an average of about 25 minutes, I would say. Even though I've only listened to the first 5 episodes, I do know a bit about the podcast, so I didn't go in completely new, but I had never fully sat down to listen to them. I have an online friend who is absolutely in love with the podcast and swears by it and has been trying to get me to listen to it for a long time, and I just now decided that it might be a great time to start it, and I'm very glad I did, because like I said, I'm intrigued already. The podcast begins just as a narrative from Jonathan Sims reviewing these statements of paranormal activity or behavior that witnesses or victims, however you would say it, have observed. And he's just reading them back in his own little theatrical reenactments. And then at the beginning and the endings of each episode, he's like, this is bullshit. but in a bit more British and proper way, he's like, oh yes, this is all well and good, but he happened to be taking drugs at the beginning of this statement right before, and he mentions that he never really stopped doing drugs, and also this is factually incorrect. You get it, you know. He's saying it's bullshit. However, as the podcast continues, it's very long. I think there are, how many seasons? I think there are 5 seasons. As the seasons progress, not only does he become more receptive to the beliefs or to the paranormal in general, many paranormal events themselves start unraveling in his own life. Him and Martin Blackwood, who becomes his partner later on in the series. What makes the Magnus Archives so convincing as a horror podcast, at least in my opinion, is the medium, quote-unquote medium, that they're using to record. Jonathan Sims figures out that the typical digital recording of these statements is no longer possible, and that they can only be recorded on a tape recorder, which makes for a very nice atmospheric sound when you're listening to the podcast in your headphones. It sounds very old, archival, not to beat a dead horse, but yes, archival and mysterious and sort of vintage. And I think with the idea of these tapes being vintage sort of adds to the horror element in general. I think this can be said across like any horror medium, but if something sounds old, it just tricks your brain into thinking like, oh, old means, ghosts. Old means dead. Old means fossils and history, rich and deep history, and, bad or good, but mostly bad, things can sprout from that, especially in the horror genre. Jonathan Sims, the actual person, not the character, is very convincing in his role, and I think that also really adds to it. He genuinely reads and reacts like an intellectual paranormal history buff as he continues to recall these things and observes. The score, of course, also adds to the horror. There's always whenever the plot of these retellings gets particularly intense or frightening or strange or unnerving, there's a score that creeps into the background and has these high sort of ringing notes and these low, very pulsating bass notes, which obviously just adds to the feeling. The entire thing just makes me like, it definitely feels like gothic, which is strange because it takes place in modern day, at least the retellings do. I believe some of the stories are set much more far back, just over the course of history. I believe that one of the episodes that I've already listened to was set in the 90s, but in general, the retelling of everything by Jonathan Sims is set in modern day, but it definitely feels gothic to me. But also, I think this will be clear when I talk about Lolita in the next field report, but I am just a fan of gothic everything. I love gothic literature, and so I'm always just thinking about it. It's always on the brain. So that could possibly be why. But what I mean is that when I listen to the episodes, it feels like I'm in the UK, and it's rainy and cloudy and dark, or almost dark, and it's cold, and there's a chill in the air, and something is wrong. Something is afoot in the UK, in the United Kingdom, and it's up to me to retell it. It's just it does a great job at creating an atmosphere, and I really appreciate that about it. But aside from the thriller, mystery, horrific atmosphere and plot, it also develops into this beautiful piece of literature as Jonathan Sims gets to meet his partner in crime, quote unquote, partner in crime, Martin Blackwood. They develop a relationship, or a friendship, and then a relationship, and it is very, very beautiful. Some of the quotes and the dialogue in this podcast is truly, really remarkable. One of the things that piqued my interest when I first started learning about the Magnus Archives was this quote by the character Martin when he's talking about loneliness. I think he's just in the face of something terrifying that's causing him to doubt, and then he's reassuring himself, saying like, no, I won't be lonely anymore. I'm not lonely. I have friends, or something along those lines. I wish I could quote it better. Maybe I'll put it up on the screen right now, but here it is. But that's what piqued my interest, as well as a couple other that I saw my online friend, retweeting or something. I can't recall. But it seems like a very beautiful show, and I can't wait to continue it. And I hope that this maybe pushes you towards considering listening as well. It's available on Spotify, YouTube, I believe, possibly Apple Music. I'm not really sure. And it's very good, and I recommend it. I forgot to mention this in the last one, but I did put my Pinterest board inspiration in the description, and I'll do that again for this one. So be sure to look at that. Thank you for listening.